a poor girl offered a broken doll to the young billionaire. "It's my only toy, please buy it, I need food." She points her finger to show him where she lives, and he's shocked and starts crying. The waiter approached with that expression Spencer had seen thousands of times, the mixture of civility and professional distance required by five-star restaurants. "Would you like anything else, Mr. Harrington?" Spencer observed the plate in front of him. The beef Wellington, which cost more than many people earned in a day, was only half eaten. The $800 bottle of red wine remained almost untouched. "No, you can bring the check." The waiter hesitated, glancing at the food that would go to waste. Spencer noticed but didn't care. For him, dinner wasn't really about the food. It was just another empty obligation. While he waited, he checked his phone, 3 emails from his CFO, 2 from his lawyer, and 12 notifications from his stock app. His fortune had increased by a few million in the past hours. The number on the screen was just that, a number. At 42, Spencer Harrington had built an empire. He lived in a penthouse overlooking Central Park, owned homes on 3 continents, and his tech company dominated the global market. On paper, he had it all. The waiter returned with the card machine. Spencer paid without looking at the total, left a generous tip, and stood up. His steps were confident as he crossed the dining room. A few businessmen recognized him and waved. He responded with a quick gesture, polite enough, but not enough to start a conversation. The cold night air hit his face when the doors opened. He adjusted his Italian wool coat and looked up at the city sky, starless. The city shone with building lights, but Spencer found no beauty in any of it. His driver would be waiting 2 blocks away. Spencer preferred walking a bit after dinners, a habit his doctor had suggested to help with digestion, not that he felt any difference. As he crossed the first street, he looked both ways without really seeing anything. His body was there, but his mind was already on the next day, meetings, contracts, acquisitions. The life of a man whose schedule was always full, yet whose heart remained empty. That's when something gently tugged on the hem of his coat. Spencer stopped, confused. He looked down and saw a small child, a girl with dark, messy hair and big eyes. She wore a worn-out coat, obviously too large for her frail body. In one hand, she held a rag doll, old and faded, with one arm hanging by a few threads. "Mister, it's my only toy. Please buy it. I need food." The girl's voice was soft but firm. She didn't sound like she was begging for money, the way a few homeless kids Spencer occasionally saw did. There was something different in her posture, a rare dignity for someone so young. Spencer looked around, searching for any responsible adult. The street was nearly deserted at that hour. "Where are your parents?" he asked, his tone harsher than he intended. The girl clutched the doll to her chest before replying, "My mom left. I live with my grandma." Spencer reached into his pocket, automatically searching for his wallet. It was his standard reflex, solving problems with money, but the girl shook her head. The child held out the broken doll, displaying it as if it were a treasure. "It's all I have, but we're hungry." Spencer stood still. The child's words hit him like a punch to the gut. It wasn't just what she said, but how she said it, without self-pity, only the raw truth in a child's voice. For an instant, time seemed to stop. In Spencer's mind, images of the restaurant blended with the sight of the broken doll, the half-finished Wellington, the expensive wine almost untouched, food that could have fed this child for days. Something inside him trembled, an emotion he hadn't felt in so long that he barely recognized it. Guilt, shame, empathy? Spencer couldn't tell, but he felt the numbness that had followed him for years begin to dissolve. "What's your name?" he asked, crouching to her level. "June," the girl replied, still holding onto the doll. "And this is Flower." She gently lifted the broken doll. "June," Spencer repeated, and the name sounded strangely familiar on his lips. "I'm Spencer." She nodded seriously, as though they were sealing an important deal. "Flower hurt her arm," June explained, showing him the doll's damaged spot. "Just like Grandma hurt her knee last week. But Grandma won't let us go to the doctor because it costs money." Spencer felt a tightness in his chest. The last time he'd felt this was when? Maybe in childhood, before his father turned everything into lessons about success and competition, and suddenly tears began streaming down his face. "Are you hungry now, June?" The girl hesitated, as if the question might be a trap. After a moment, she nodded. "And your grandma, is she waiting for you?" "Grandma Lois always waits," June replied simply. "She doesn't sleep until I get home." Spencer looked at his watch. It was almost 10 at night, a child so young, alone on the streets at this hour. "What are you doing out so late?" June hugged the doll more tightly. "We didn't eat today. Grandma said everything would be fine, but I saw her giving me her portion yesterday. So I came out to look for something." The bluntness of her answer left Spencer speechless. The girl spoke of hunger the way his executives discussed numbers as an inevitable fact of life. He stood up, suddenly aware of his Italian wool coat, his handmade shoes, his watch worth more than many people earned in years. In the reflection of a shop window, he saw the image of a well-dressed man beside a child wearing clothes far too large, an unsettling contrast that summed up everything wrong with the world. "Do you like hamburgers, June?" The girl's face lit up for an instant, but soon turned serious again. "Yes, but Grandma Lois needs to eat too." Spencer looked in the direction where his driver would be waiting, then at the child in front of him. In his mind, he pictured his meticulously scheduled night, reviewing contracts, a video conference with Asian investors, an important email to send before midnight. For the first time in years, Spencer Harrington ignored his agenda. "Let's go get something to eat, then, and we'll bring some for your grandma, too." June didn't smile as Spencer expected. Instead, she studied him with surprisingly wise eyes. "Do you promise?" The question caught him off guard. When was the last time someone asked him for a promise? In Spencer's world, there were contracts, agreements, terms of commitment, documents filled with legal jargon. Promises were for children. "I promise," he answered, feeling the weight of those words. June extended her small hand, as if wanting to seal the deal. Spencer hesitated a moment before shaking it. Her hand was cold, and he felt a wave of protectiveness he had never experienced before. Maybe ever. "I know a diner nearby," he said, pointing in a different direction than he had planned to go. They walked side by side, the billionaire in his immaculate coat and the small girl with her broken doll. Spencer sent a quick message to his driver, delaying the pickup. Then he slipped his phone into his pocket. For some reason, the emails and notifications now seemed insignificant. The diner was nothing like the places Spencer usually dined at. There was no maitre d', no expensive wine, no fancy French-named dishes, just plain tables, a laminated menu, and the smell of home cooking. When they entered, Spencer noticed the curious looks. He didn't belong here, and everyone knew it. June, on the other hand, seemed perfectly at ease. "Can we sit over there?" she asked, pointing to a table near the window. Spencer nodded and followed her to the indicated spot. He felt out of place, as if in a foreign country without knowing the language. A waitress approached, looking from Spencer to June with curiosity. "What would you like?" Before Spencer could open the menu, June answered, "A cheeseburger, please, and fries." The confidence in her voice made Spencer smile. It was the first genuine smile he had in how long? He wasn't even sure. "I'll have the same," he told the waitress. "And please prepare 2 more to go." As the waitress walked away, June placed the broken doll on the table carefully, as if it could feel pain. "Flower likes hamburgers too," she explained seriously, "but she only eats when nobody's watching." Spencer studied the doll. It was obviously handmade, stitched from different scraps of fabric. The damaged arm hung by a few threads, but aside from that, it seemed to have been cared for with love. "She's very pretty," he said, surprised by how sincere his own voice sounded. June smiled for the first time, a small smile that lit up her face. "Grandma Lois made her for me, using pieces of my mom's clothes, so I wouldn't forget." Spencer wanted to ask more about June's mother, but something stopped him. Maybe he was afraid of erasing that small smile. "Your grandma must be very skilled," June nodded vigorously. "Grandma Lois can do lots of things. She sews, cooks, tells stories." The girl paused, but now her hands shake a lot. That's why Flower's arm is hurt. Grandma said she would fix it, but I know it hurts her fingers. Spencer felt a lump in his throat. This child's life, and her grandmother's, were so different from his. Yet there was a dignity in how June spoke of their struggles, without dramatizing, simply accepting them. Their food arrived, interrupting his thoughts. The burger was simple, nothing compared to the elaborate dishes he was used to. But as June bit into hers with obvious delight, Spencer realized he was actually hungry, truly hungry, not that mechanical social obligation to eat in fancy restaurants. "My grandma loves fries," June said between bites, taking a fry from the plate. "But she only eats the ones she makes. She says the ones from outside have too much salt." Spencer watched how she ate, slowly, savoring each bite, so different from the mechanical way he had eaten for years. "Do you live only with your grandma?" June nodded, her mouth too full to speak. After swallowing, she explained, "My mom went to live with the angels when I was really small, so it's just me and Grandma Lois." The direct way she spoke about loss left Spencer disarmed. In his world, people used euphemisms, avoided tough subjects. "And your dad?" The girl shrugged. "I don't have one. Grandma says some princes only show up at the ball and then leave." Spencer almost choked on his burger. The wisdom in that simple answer caught him off guard. As they ate, June talked about her life, her school, where she went whenever possible, the park where she played, the stories her grandma told before bed. Spencer listened with an attention he hadn't given to anyone in years. He wasn't thinking about how to fix her problems or how to make the conversation productive. For the first time in a long while, he was simply listening. "My teacher said I draw really well," June mentioned, tracing imaginary shapes on the table with her finger, "but we don't have money to buy colored pencils." Spencer thought of the expensive, impersonal gifts he gave on his few friends' birthdays, rare bottles of wine, luxury watches, items that cost more than a year's worth of school supplies for a child. "What's your favorite color?" he asked, surprised at his own interest. "Yellow," June answered without hesitation. "It's the color of the sun, and Grandma says the sun shines the same for everyone, whether they have money or not." Spencer felt a tightness in his chest again. When was the last time he'd paid attention to the color of the sun? When they finished eating, the to-go burgers were ready. Spencer paid the bill, leaving a tip that made the waitress's eyes widen. "Now let's take this to your grandma," he said, as they left the diner. June held the bag with the burgers as if it were a treasure. With her other hand, she clutched the broken doll to her chest. "You'll like Grandma Lois," June asserted confidently as they walked. "She makes the best tea in the world when we're sad." Spencer smiled, thinking of how long it had been since anyone cared about his emotional state. In his life, people asked about stocks, mergers, and acquisitions, never if he was sad or needed tea. The night was colder now, and Spencer noticed that June's coat was far too thin for the temperature. Without much thought, he removed his cashmere scarf and wrapped it around the girl's neck. "It's too cold for you to walk like this." June touched the soft fabric in admiration. "It's so warm, feels like a cloud." Spencer said nothing. An uncomfortable thought nagged him. How much had that scarf cost? Probably more than many families spent on food for an entire month. "Where are we going, June?" The girl pointed in a direction that led further away from the city's upscale center. "We live over there, at the end of the alley." As they walked, the streets changed. Elegant buildings gave way to simpler structures, then to rundown constructions. Well-kept sidewalks turned cracked and uneven. Bright storefront lights were replaced by the dim glow of old street lamps. Spencer had never been in this part of the city. To him, these places existed only as statistics in urban development reports. Now, following a small child and her broken doll, he entered a world that had always been there but that he had chosen to ignore. "It's right over there," June said, quickening her pace. Spencer noticed that, despite the precarious surroundings, June walked confidently. This was her world. She knew every corner, every alley, every shadow. At the back of his mind, a voice that sounded like his father's questioned what he was doing here. He could have simply handed over some money, called social services, delegated the problem the way he did with everything else in his life. But something stronger pushed him onward. That simple phrase, "It's all I have," but we're hungry, kept echoing in his mind, breaking down barriers he hadn't realized he had built around his heart. "We're almost there, Mr. Spencer," June announced, looking back over her shoulder. "Grandma Lois will be happy to have a visitor." Spencer doubted that. What grandmother would be happy to see her granddaughter bring home a well-dressed stranger late at night? But he said nothing. He just kept following June, the small guide who, unknowingly, was leading him to an encounter that would change his life forever. The alley grew narrower as they advanced. Spencer felt the atmosphere shift with each step. The air seemed heavier, the shadows darker, the silence deeper. Yet June walked as if she knew each stone by heart. "This is where we live," she said, stopping in front of a small structure at the back of the alley. Spencer observed the place with a mix of surprise and discomfort. It was an improvised shack, with unplastered concrete walls and a worn wooden door. A tiny window with a thin curtain let a bit of light escape outside. "Grandma must be worried," June murmured, looking at an invisible watch on her wrist, a gesture she had probably seen adults do. Before they could knock, the door opened. A middle-aged woman appeared, her eyes immediately locking on June. "Where were you, my angel? I was so—" Her words died as she noticed Spencer. For a moment, time seemed to freeze. The woman's expression shifted from worry to disbelief, then to something Spencer couldn't define, a mix of shock and recognition. "I brought hamburgers, Grandma," June exclaimed, oblivious to the sudden tension. "Mr. Spencer bought them for us." The woman didn't reply. Her eyes, now wide, stayed on Spencer, as if she were seeing a ghost. "Lois?" The name slipped from Spencer's lips before he could stop it. It was as if a door locked away for decades suddenly swung open in his mind. Those eyes, those hands, that small mark near her lip. How had he not recognized her before? "Spencer." Her voice was barely a whisper. "My boy." June looked back and forth between them, confused. "You two know each other?" Lois, the woman who had been his nanny during his early childhood, who dried his tears when his father yelled, who told him stories about magical worlds where people were kind to one another, was standing there in a reality as far from those stories as possible. She looked older than her years should suggest. The wrinkles around her eyes and mouth spoke of constant worries. The hands Spencer remembered as soft now showed calluses and protruding veins. But her eyes, the same eyes that once comforted him, still held the kindness he had forgotten he ever knew. "Come in, please," Lois said, taking a step to the side. Inside was small but surprisingly organized. A worn couch stood against one wall, a table with two chairs against another, and a curtain separated what seemed to be a sleeping area. There were signs of effort everywhere, colorful cloths covering stains on the walls, June's drawings taped up, artificial flowers in a painted tin can. "Look what we brought, Grandma." June rushed to put the bag of food on the table. "Cheeseburgers and fries, just like you like." Lois looked at the bag, then at Spencer, an unreadable emotion on her face. "That's very kind of you," she said in a restrained voice. Spencer couldn't look away from her. How was this possible? Lois, the woman his father had abruptly fired when Spencer was 10, the woman whose name had been banned from his house, whose letters his father had hidden, was now living in this place, caring for a child whose eyes had the same glow as hers. "I didn't know," was all he managed to say. "Of course you didn't," Lois answered with a sad smile. "How could you?" June, impatient, was already unwrapping the hamburgers. "Grandma, come eat. It's so good." Lois hesitated for a moment, then approached the table. Spencer noticed how slowly she walked, as if each step required conscious effort. He remembered what June had said about her grandmother's injured knee. "Sit with us," Lois invited, gesturing to one of the chairs. Spencer sat down, feeling too big for the tiny space, out of place in his expensive clothes. The contrast between his designer coat and Lois's mended shawl was almost painful to see. "How did you find my granddaughter?" Lois asked, while June devoured her burger with obvious delight. Spencer explained about their encounter on the street, how June's words had impacted him. As he spoke, he watched Lois eat slowly, almost reluctantly, like someone used to saving food for later. "You always had a good heart," Lois commented when he finished. "Even as a child." The remark caught him off guard. A good heart? Was that really how she saw him? The man who went days without feeling anything, who measured relationships by their strategic value, who left expensive meals half-eaten while people a few blocks away starved? "I've changed a lot," he replied, unable to meet her eyes. "We all change," Lois said gently. "Life has a way of shaping us." June Haas, who had devoured her burger, was now quietly playing with the broken doll, apparently oblivious to the adults' heavy conversation. But Spencer noticed how her eyes occasionally flicked to them, attentive. "I have to go," Spencer said abruptly, standing up. Being so close to Lois dredged up memories he had worked hard to forget, of a time when he felt safe, when someone looked at him as though he mattered beyond his potential for success. Lois nodded, a hint of disappointment crossing her face, quickly replaced by understanding. "Thank you for the food," she said with dignity. "It meant a lot to us." Spencer felt another lump in his throat. How could he explain that seeing Lois living in these conditions made him feel a shame he couldn't describe? "Could I come back another day?" he asked, the words tumbling out before he could stop them. Lois's face lit up briefly, wearing that same smile he remembered from childhood. "Our door is always open to you, Spencer." June ran up to him, holding the broken doll. "Flower wants to say bye," she said, offering the doll. Spencer knelt down and gently touched the doll's head. "Bye, Flower. Take good care of June and Grandma Lois." When he finally left the small home, the cold night air hit his face like a slap. The contrast between the outside world and the tiny universe he had just left felt almost physical. Spencer walked through the dark alley, his footsteps echoing off the narrow walls. Each step away from that house seemed heavier than the last. The image of Lois eating slowly, savoring each bite as though it was rare and precious, burned in his mind. Her eyes, the ones that had dried his childhood tears, now marked by worries he couldn't fathom. When he reached the main street, Spencer stopped and looked back. From a distance, the alley looked like just another dark crack in the urban landscape, a place easy to ignore, to walk past, to pretend it didn't exist, just as he had done all these years. His driver was still waiting a couple of streets away. Soon, he would be back in his penthouse apartment, overlooking a city that, from above, hid its dark corners and painful stories. Spencer took a deep breath, feeling his chest tighten as though something inside him was being crushed. Something that might have always been there, just waiting to be acknowledged. The realization that he had built his life over emptiness, while the people who truly mattered had been left behind. With one last glance at the alley, he moved on, carrying the weight of that discovery like a new burden. But for the first time in years, it was a burden that made him feel alive. 3 days passed before Spencer returned to the alley. 3 days in which he couldn't focus during meetings, in which his coffee went cold while he stared out the window of his 40th floor office, in which he slept poorly, haunted by dreams where he was a child again, and Lois called to him but he couldn't reach her. On the morning of the 4th day, Spencer cancelled all his appointments. His assistant looked stunned. Spencer Harrington, in 15 years, had never cancelled a meeting without immediately rescheduling. But today was different. Today, he had somewhere else to be. On the way, Spencer stopped at a grocery store. Not the kind he usually frequented, with pristine aisles and imported organic products, but a regular store where everyday people bought essentials. He walked through the aisles, looking at packages, prices, and people checking labels and doing mental math. He grabbed a cart and started filling it. Rice, beans, pasta, sauces, fruits, vegetables, milk, bread, eggs, meats. He remembered June talking about Grandma liking to make fries and added a bag of potatoes. He recalled the doll's broken arm and included a box of thread and needles. At the checkout, the cashier looked at him curiously. His tailored suit stood out, as did the quantity of groceries. Spencer paid without hesitation, ignoring the puzzled looks of the other customers. His driver waited outside, equally surprised to see his boss carrying so many bags. "Where to, sir?" Spencer hesitated for only a second. "Head to the south side, near the old textile factory." The driver nodded, but Spencer noticed tension in his posture. That wasn't exactly an area they usually visited. During the drive, Spencer looked out the window as if seeing the city for the first time. The luxury buildings disappeared, replaced by simpler constructions. The upscale storefronts gave way to small businesses. People on the sidewalks no longer wore designer clothes. "Stop here," Spencer instructed when they were a few blocks away from the alley. "I'll walk the rest of the way. Come back in 2 hours." The driver seemed poised to protest but held back. Spencer grabbed the bags, heavier than he'd imagined, and started walking. The streets were livelier than on the night he met June. Children played in a makeshift park. Elderly men played dominoes at a concrete table. Women chatted as they hung clothes on improvised clotheslines between buildings. Spencer felt curious glances as he advanced with his bags. He didn't belong here, and everyone knew it. Yet oddly, he didn't feel threatened, just out of place like an actor on the wrong stage. Arriving at the alley's entrance, his heart pounded. What if they weren't there? What if that encounter was just a meaningless coincidence, something best forgotten? Spencer took a deep breath and entered the narrow alley. Daylight revealed details the night had hidden: small pots with hardy plants, a broom against the wall, a tiny clothesline with neatly cared-for clothing, despite the wear. He stopped in front of the small house at the back. The faded blue door was closed, and for a moment, Spencer hesitated. Then, juggling the bags, he knocked lightly. Silence. Spencer waited, the weight of the bag starting to strain his arms, unaccustomed to carrying anything heavier than a briefcase. Then he heard soft footsteps approaching, and the door opened. It was June, still in pajamas, her hair messy as if she had just gotten up. Her eyes widened when she saw Spencer, and a broad smile lit up her face. "Who came back?" she exclaimed, turning and shouting inside the house. "Grandma, it's Mr. Spencer. He brought lots of bags." Spencer heard movement inside, and soon Lois appeared at the door. She wore a simple dress and a worn wool coat, but there was something about her posture that conveyed dignity, an elegance no expensive outfit could replicate. "Spencer," she said, her voice carrying both surprise and something else, perhaps hope. "I brought a few things," he explained, feeling suddenly shy, like a boy seeking approval. Lois looked at the bags, then at Spencer. She didn't smile or gush thanks or show desperate relief. Instead, she gave a small nod, her eyes revealing a restrained gratitude that preserved her dignity. "Come in," she invited, stepping aside. "June, help put away the groceries." The girl ran to take some of the bags, her enthusiasm contagious. Spencer walked in, placing the rest on the small table. June began taking items out of the bags with admiration, as if each packet of rice or can of sauce were a rare treasure. "Look, Grandma, potatoes, now you can make fries." Lois smiled softly, storing the items in a small cupboard that Spencer noticed was nearly empty. "You didn't have to do this," she said quietly, when June ran off to put the milk in a tiny fridge. "I wanted to," Spencer replied simply. Lois studied him for a moment, as if trying to solve a mystery. "You've always been generous," she commented, placing the eggs away carefully. "I still remember how you insisted on sharing your toys with the gardener's son, even when your father—" She didn't finish, but she didn't have to. Spencer remembered his father's fury when he found them playing together, how the gardener was fired the next day, and how Spencer was locked in his room for an entire day as punishment. "A lot has changed," Spencer said, looking at the small space that felt even smaller with his presence. "I've changed. Maybe," Lois replied, a knowing look in her eyes that made Spencer feel exposed. But the heart rarely forgets what it once was. June ran back over, interrupting the moment. She held a piece of paper in her hand. "I made a drawing for you." Spencer took the paper, feeling a lump in his throat as he saw what the girl had drawn. 3 stick figures holding hands, a tall one in a suit, a figure in a dress, and a small one in the middle holding a doll. "That's us," June explained, pointing to each figure. "Me, you, and Grandma. And Flower too." "It's very pretty," Spencer said, surprised at how moved he was by that simple drawing. "I gave you the same suit colors you wore the other day," June said proudly, "and Grandma is smiling because she smiles more when you're here." Spencer glanced at Lois as who looked away, a slight blush on her cheeks. "June, Why don't you go get dressed? Lois suggested. It's already past 10 in the morning. The girl nodded, but before leaving she looked at Spencer seriously. You'll come back again, right? The question caught Spencer off guard. He looked at the drawing in his hands, the three stick figures together. The disproportionate smile June had drawn on the figure meant to be him. I will, he replied, realizing that he genuinely wanted to. June smiled, satisfied. Now we have a guest who doesn't just pass by, she declared before running off to get changed. The child's words lingered in the air, carrying a significance beyond her youthful understanding. Spencer felt something shift inside him. Not the pang of guilt or pity he had initially felt, but something deeper, like old roots beginning to awaken. As he helped Lois store the rest of the groceries, moving carefully around the small space, Spencer realized he wasn't just bringing food to a needy family. He wasn't just fulfilling a moral duty or soothing his conscience. He was reconnecting with something lost inside himself, a genuine human connection, a sense of belonging that money could never buy, a version of himself that had been buried under years of cold ambition and empty success. And for the first time in a long while, Spencer felt he was exactly where he was meant to be. In the days that followed, an unexpected routine formed in Spencer's life. Mornings were still filled with meetings, calls, and documents to sign. Afternoons, much of the same. His corporate world, which he managed with surgical precision. But now, at the end of the day, he often felt compelled to return to that narrow alley, to the small house with the blue door. Lois never asked when he would come back, but Spencer began to notice how her eyes lit up each time he arrived. June Weiss, less reserved in her emotions, ran to the door when she heard his knock. 3 quick taps, a pause, 2 more. One particular afternoon, Spencer drove himself, another new habit that surprised his driver. Instead of heading straight to the alley, he stopped at a toy store downtown, an upscale store with elegant displays and well-dressed customers. May I help you? A saleswoman asked with a professional smile. Spencer hesitated. What exactly was he looking for? He let his gaze roam over trains, science kits, educational games. At the back of the store, he noticed a section of dolls, not the plastic kind with heavy makeup, but handcrafted ones with intricate details. I'm looking for a doll, he finally said. For a girl. The saleswoman led him to the premium doll section. Spencer examined each one, some dressed like princesses, others like explorers, some in casual outfits made of fine fabrics. This is our best seller, the saleswoman explained, showing him a doll in an elegant box. It comes with a full wardrobe and accessories. Spencer picked it up, feeling its weight. It was beautiful, flawlessly made, with silky hair and a delicate face. It cost more than many families spent on food for weeks. It would be perfect for a CEO's daughter, but for June. Is something wrong, sir? Asked the saleswoman, noticing his hesitation. Spencer placed the doll back on the shelf. It's not quite what I'm looking for, he said, thinking of Flower, the rag doll with one arm, which June treasured like gold. That's when he noticed a different doll on a less prominent shelf. It wasn't in a fancy box, didn't come with expensive accessories. It was a cloth doll, handmade, with a stitched face and yarn hair. She wore a simple cotton dress and had a gentle expression. This one, Spencer said, picking it up. This is perfect. The saleswoman looked surprised by his choice but didn't comment. While wrapping the doll in gift paper, Spencer noticed a set of artist-grade colored pencils near the checkout. He remembered how June said she loved to draw but had no colored pencils. I'll take these too, he added, pointing to the box with 36 colors. By the time he reached the alley, the sun was setting, painting the sky orange and pink in a way he rarely noticed before. Spencer carried the wrapped package and the box of pencils as if they were fragile, precious items. June opened the door before he could even knock, as if she sensed his presence. "Mr. Spencer," she exclaimed, her eyes immediately fixed on the packages in his hands. Lois appeared behind her, drying her hands on a faded dish towel. "Come in," she said with a quiet smile. "We were just getting dinner ready." The small house smelled of something homemade, maybe soup or stew. Spencer noticed how the cupboard was now stocked with more items, how the table was covered with a simple but clean cloth, how a few wildflowers stood in a cup on the windowsill. "I brought something for you, June," he said, holding out the packages. The girl's eyes went wide. She glanced at Lois, seeking permission. Grandma nodded slightly. "You can open it, sweetheart." June took the smaller package first. Her small fingers carefully untied the ribbon, treating the wrapping paper as a gift in itself. When she opened the box and saw the colored pencils, a smile lit up her face. "Look, Grandma. All the colors in the world." Lois smiled, her eyes meeting Spencer's in a silent thank you. "What about that one?" June asked, pointing to the larger package. "Open it and see," Spencer said, a sudden nervousness making his heart race. What if June didn't like it? What if the doll was too simple or too fancy? June unwrapped the larger package with the same care. When she finally took out the doll, she went quiet for a moment, her eyes studying every detail. "She's beautiful," June finally whispered, hugging the doll to her chest. Spencer released a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. "What are you going to name her?" he asked. June thought for a moment, her small face showing intense concentration. "Berry," she decided at last, "because it's sweet, but it can sometimes stain your clothes, just like life." Spencer exchanged a surprised look with Lois. Where did a child so young get such wisdom? "It's a lovely name," he agreed. June set Berry on the table and ran to the corner of the room where Flower armed the old doll sat in a makeshift chair made of cardboard boxes. Spencer watched with a pang of guilt. Maybe he shouldn't have brought a new doll. Maybe June would abandon the broken one that clearly meant so much to her. But June surprised him again. Instead of discarding Flower, she brought her over and placed her next to Berry on the table. She carefully adjusted Flower's damaged arm, making sure both dolls were comfortable. "Now Flower has a sister," she explained, looking fondly at the two dolls. "She gets lonely when I go to school." "You're not going to leave Flower behind?" Spencer asked, unable to hide his curiosity. June looked at him as though the question were absurd. Of course not. She's seen a lot, now she has a sister. Something in that simple answer moved Spencer deeply. He watched as June arranged the two dolls, speaking to them softly, including Flower in every moment, ensuring the older, damaged doll received as much attention as the new one. Lois, who had returned to the tiny kitchen, called them for dinner. The meal was simple. Thick vegetable soup with chunks of chicken and bread Spencer recognized from the groceries he had brought earlier. As they ate, June placed Flower and Berry side by side in an empty chair, occasionally feeding them imaginary crumbs. "Mr. Spencer," June said suddenly between spoonfuls of soup, "do you want to see my world tomorrow?" Spencer looked at Lois, confused. June's world is what she calls the places she likes to visit around the neighborhood, Lois explained with a gentle smile. "Since we can't travel much, June creates her own worlds nearby." Spencer felt that pang again. How limited was this child's horizon, whose travels were confined to a few blocks around an alley. He, who had traveled the world multiple times, who owned properties on different continents, suddenly felt ashamed of his freedom and mobility. "I'd love to see your world, June," he replied sincerely. The girl's eyes sparkled with excitement. "I'll show you the secret tree, the stone palace, and the river of time." Spencer had no idea what those places were, but June's enthusiasm was infectious. "Can I join you two?" Lois asked, and Spencer noticed how she tried to hide an expression of pain when she moved. "Is your knee hurting today?" June asked, showing surprising insight for someone her age. Lois waved her hand dismissively. "It's nothing, dear. The weather's changing, that's all." "You should see a doctor," Spencer suggested, worried. An uncomfortable silence fell over the table. Spencer realized his mistake immediately. Of course, Lois knew she needed medical attention, but how could she afford it with no money or health insurance? "I'm sorry," he murmured. "No need to apologize," Lois said with dignity. "You're right, but some things have to wait." The rest of dinner passed with lighter conversation. June talked about her school, the classes she attended when Lois could afford to send her, the kind teacher who sometimes gave her used books, the classmates she played with at recess. When Spencer finally said goodbye, promising to return the next day to see June's world, the girl ran to get a drawing. "I did this today," she said, handing him the sheet of paper. Spencer looked at the drawing and felt his throat tighten. It was a simple, childlike representation of three people, him, Lois, and June in front of a house. But what moved him most was how June had drawn him, smiling, holding her hand, as part of that little family. "Thank you, June," he managed, carefully folding the drawing and placing it in the inner pocket of his jacket, close to his heart. The next morning, Spencer cancelled 2 important meetings without a second thought. He dressed more casually, jeans and a simple shirt, something he rarely wore. His assistant looked at him like he'd grown a second head when he left the office before noon. "I'm taking the rest of the day off," Spencer announced, ignoring the young man's shocked expression. By the time he reached the alley, June was already waiting at the door, wearing what looked like her best outfit, a faded but neatly pressed blue dress. She held Flower in one arm and Berry in the other. "They're coming too," she explained, when Spencer raised an eyebrow. Lois appeared at the door, lightly leaning on the frame. "Are you sure you don't want me to come?" she asked, and Spencer noticed the concern in her voice. "We'll be fine," he assured her. "We're not leaving the neighborhood." Lois nodded, but Spencer saw how her eyes followed June with that look only mothers and grandmothers know, a mix of love and constant worry. "First, let's go to the Stone Palace," June announced, taking Spencer's hand as though it were the most natural thing in the world. She guided him through alleys and shortcuts he never would have found on his own. Spencer noticed how many people greeted June by name, how seniors sitting on chairs in front of their homes smiled at her, how the few unhoused folks treated her like part of an extended family. The Stone Palace turned out to be the crumbling wall of an old factory covered with moss and vines. June explained how the different exposed rocks formed the palace's rooms and corridors, and how the bugs living there were the inhabitants. The secret tree was an old oak in the only green space in the neighborhood, a vacant lot the community had turned into a makeshift park. The tree had a hollow in its trunk where, June said, people could whisper their secrets. "Want to tell the tree a secret?" she asked, looking seriously at Spencer. He hesitated, then bent down and whispered into the trunk's hollow, "I'm afraid of failing at the things that really matter." The River of Time was actually a small drainage ditch where rainwater formed a narrow stream. June explained how the water came from different places and went on to others, just like the days of our lives. As they walked, Spencer began to see the neighborhood through June's eyes, not as a place of scarcity and hardship, but as a universe full of hidden wonders. A peeling wall turned into a map of distant lands. A row of colorful bottles in a window became a museum of lights. A lazy cat napping in the sun was the guardian of invisible treasure. "How did you come up with all these places?" Spencer asked, genuinely impressed by her imagination. June shrugged, adjusting Flower and Berry in her arms. "I didn't make them up. They've always been here," she answered simply. "You just need to look carefully. Good things stay quiet." Spencer felt those words resonate inside him. How many good things had he failed to notice in his busy life? How many everyday wonders had slipped by while he chased numbers on a screen, achievements on an endless list? They stopped at a small bakery where an elderly lady insisted on giving June a warm bread roll. The girl immediately broke it in half, offering a piece to Spencer. "Mrs. Maria makes the best bread in the world," June declared seriously. "She taught Grandma Lois too, but Mrs. Maria's is still better." Spencer bit into the simple roll and tasted a flavor that no Michelin-starred restaurant had ever managed. A flavor made of love, offered with generosity. On their way back, they passed a tiny convenience store. June stopped, gazing inside dreamily. "What is it?" Spencer asked, following her gaze. "Nothing," June said, but her eyes remained fixed on something inside the store. Spencer went in, June following close behind. On the shelf that had caught her eye was a simple set of colored threads and needles. "Is that to fix Flower's arm?" Spencer asked, suddenly understanding. June nodded shyly. "Grandma said she'd fix it, but her hands hurt a lot. I wanted to learn sewing too, so I can help." Spencer bought the sewing kit, along with some candy and a children's activity magazine. He saw June eyeing curiously. When they left the store, the sun was beginning to set. painting the humble streets with golden tones that made even the most worn buildings look admirable. "We need to get back," June said, suddenly worried. "Grandma gets nervous if it gets dark and I'm still out." On the way back, June spoke less, tired from the long afternoon of adventures. Spencer watched her from the corner of his eye, amazed at how this child, living in what many would consider misery, had created a world of magic and possibility around her. When they returned to the little house at the end of the alley, Lois was waiting at the door, relief evident in her face when she saw them safe. "Grandma, Mr. Spencer saw my whole world," June announced, momentarily revived by her grandmother's presence. "And he brought thread to fix Flower's arm. Can you teach me to sew?" Lois smiled, running her hand over her granddaughter's hair. "Of course, my love. But first, let's thank Mr. Spencer for taking you out and for the gifts." "Thank you, Mr. Spencer," June said formally, though her eyes shone with genuine joy no etiquette class could teach. "I'm the one who should thank you, June," Spencer replied, realizing he truly meant it. "You showed me things I never would have seen on my own." Walking back to his car, Spencer felt something different inside him. Not just empathy or pity, or a fleeting desire to help. It was a deeper transformation, a revelation of a kind of beauty money never bought. The beauty of imagination, of gratitude for small things, of creating meaning even in the toughest circumstances. Right there, strolling through a part of town he once avoided, Spencer felt a purpose forming inside him that would change his life. Bringing groceries, gifts, or occasional help wouldn't be enough. Visiting and leaving, keeping worlds separated wouldn't be enough. He needed something more permanent, something that honored Lois's dignity, June's creativity, and the resilience of that community. Spencer got into his luxury car with a clarity he hadn't felt in years. The cancelled meetings, unanswered emails, postponed negotiations, all of it seemed unimportant now. For the first time, he saw beauty where he used to see poverty, potential where he used to see problems, connections where he once saw only statistics. The purpose born that afternoon had no clear shape yet, but it had a strength Spencer knew would guide his every decision from now on. It wasn't about charity or traditional philanthropy. It was about building bridges between worlds, about learning as much as teaching, about seeing the intrinsic value in people society chose to ignore. While driving back to his penthouse, Spencer realized June had taught him something no elite university or business mentor had ever managed. That we shouldn't replace what has value. We should welcome it, integrate it, honor it. Just like June did with Flower and Berry, like she did with every broken piece of her world, transforming it into something magical, something worth seeing, something with its own place in the story. And that night, for the first time in years, Spencer slept without medication, without the anxiety, without the emptiness his success had never filled. It was fully dark when Spencer returned to the small house at the end of the alley. June was already asleep, exhausted after a day at school. Lois greeted him with a tired smile, her eyes carrying the weight of decades Spencer was only beginning to grasp. "She wanted to wait for you," Lois explained quietly, pointing to a carefully folded drawing on the table. "She left this for you." Spencer unfolded the paper. It was a colorful drawing made with the pencils he'd given her, a simple depiction of a man in a suit reading a book to a small child. In the corner, in the uneven writing of someone just learning, were the words, "Bedtime Stories with Uncle Spencer." Something stirred inside him. Uncle Spencer. Not Mr. Harrington, not Mr. Spencer. Uncle. "She talks about you a lot," Lois said, putting water on to boil in an old kettle. "Asks when you're coming, what you'll think of her drawings, whether you like this or that." Spencer folded the drawing carefully, placing it in his pocket. "I never imagined finding you again like this," he said, struggling with the words. Lois nodded, understanding what he couldn't say. "Life is full of twists, isn't it?" she commented, preparing 2 cups of tea with the tea bags Spencer had brought on one of his previous visits. "Who would have thought that I, who once cared for you, would now be receiving your help?" There was dignity in her voice, no self-pity, just the acknowledgement of a reality she had accepted long ago. "Lois," Spencer began, gathering courage. "What happened after you..." After my father, after your father fired me, she finished without resentment, handing him a cup and slowly sitting down. Life went on, as it always does. She blew on the hot tea, her gaze distant, as though seeing through the walls through time. I worked in many homes after yours. I raised children that weren't mine, cleaned up messes I didn't make, heard secrets I never asked to hear. She gave a small smile. My feet never stopped, Spencer. Not even when they hurt so bad I cried in the bathroom. Not even when the doctor said I was destroying my knees. Not even when I found out I was expecting a baby. Spencer's eyes widened. You had a child. A daughter, Lois corrected, her eyes softening. My Linda, the most beautiful girl you could imagine. So smart, so determined. Her voice faltered for a moment. I kept working until the day she was born. A week later, I was back cleaning other people's houses, Linda in a makeshift sling on my back. No choice to stop. No maternity leave for people like me. Spencer felt ashamed as he thought of the generous policies his own company offered executives and his reluctance to extend the same benefits to lower-level employees. How many Loises were on his payroll? Linda grew up watching me work. From a young age, she knew she had to stay quiet while I cleaned. Not to ask for things, to understand when we had food and when we didn't. Lois took a sip of tea. I made up stories for her. On nights the fridge was empty. We traveled to places with magical feasts. We'd close our eyes and I'd describe every dish, every flavor. Sometimes it worked so well she fell asleep smiling, forgetting she was hungry. Spencer felt a knot in his throat. He remembered the stories Lois used to tell him as a child, fantastic worlds where people were kind and justice existed. He now realized those stories were not just to entertain him, but to instill values his father, obsessed with success and status, neglected. When Linda grew up, she promised she'd change our lives. She studied hard as Spencer, worked by day, studied at night, got into the local community college, determined to become a nurse. The pride in Lois's voice was palpable. Then she met a young man. She thought it was love. When she got pregnant, he vanished. Spencer thought of June, of her comment about princes who show up for the ball and then leave. Linda kept studying, even pregnant. When June was born, it was like reliving my own story. But Linda was stronger than I ever was, more determined. She was going to make it. Lois paused for a long moment, gripping her teacup so tightly her knuckles turned white. It was a particularly harsh winter. Linda had a fever but insisted on going to work. We couldn't afford to lose that money. By night, when she got home, she could barely stand. I told her to rest, that I'd take care of June, that we'd find a way. Tears rolled silently down Lois's weathered face. In the morning, I couldn't wake her. Spencer felt the impact of those words like a physical blow. He didn't know what to say or do. He reached across the table, gently touching Lois's fingers. Pneumonia, Lois continued, her voice almost a whisper. The doctor said if she'd sought help sooner, if she had stayed home to rest, if we had money for the right antibiotics. She shook her head. So many ifs that never happened. Spencer remained silent, understanding how inadequate any words of comfort would be in the face of such loss. Suddenly I was alone with a 2-year-old. My knees couldn't handle heavy work anymore. The rent went up. We had to leave the tiny apartment we lived in, and then she gestured around the room. We ended up here. It's not much, but it's our little spot. How did you keep going? Spencer asked softly. Lois looked toward the corner where June slept, a simple curtain separating the small sleeping area from the rest of the room. June kept me here when I thought I couldn't continue, she replied simply. On days when the pain was unbearable, when there wasn't enough money for bread, when I questioned why go on, I looked at her and saw Linda. I saw myself. I saw a chance to break the cycle. Spencer stayed quiet, absorbing the weight of those words. This woman, who had once cared for him so lovingly, had faced more hardship than he could imagine, yet she had survived, with love, dignity, and silence. She's all I have left, Lois continued, her gaze still on the curtain, and she taught me to keep going. There was no self-pity in her voice, only quiet determination, a strength Spencer, with all his money and power, had never had to cultivate. "Nights are the worst," Lois confessed in almost a whisper. "When June falls asleep and everything's quiet, sometimes the fear creeps in, fear that one day I won't be here and she'll be alone, that she'll end up in a shelter, or worse, that all my effort will be for nothing." "That won't happen," Spencer said, surprising himself with how firm his own voice sounded. Lois looked at him, her weary eyes meeting his. "You're a good man, Spencer. You always were. Even as a boy, you had a kindness in you your father could never fully extinguish. But you have your life, your business, your own world." "A hollow world," he replied, realizing the truth of his words as they left his lips. In that moment, sitting in the tiny kitchen with the woman who had once been his anchor, Spencer understood something fundamental. Lois and June didn't need his pity, occasional handouts or expensive gifts. They needed real presence. Commitment, someone who wouldn't leave when the novelty wore off or when things got tough. And there, within those peeling walls, Spencer made a decision that would reshape his life and theirs. He would not leave. He wouldn't go back to his isolated, privileged world, pretending he didn't know what was happening here. He wouldn't be another prince who shows up only for the ball. He would stay, not just as a visitor, not just as a benefactor, but as someone who chose to be truly present in the lives of these two people who, without meaning to, were teaching him the true meaning of family. "We're here," Spencer announced, parking the car in front of a modest house in a quiet neighborhood. It wasn't a mansion or anything reminiscent of his lavish lifestyle. It was a simple two-bedroom home with a small front yard and a welcoming porch. But compared to the alley where June and Lois had lived, it might as well have been a palace. "Is this it?" June asked, her nose pressed against the car window, eyes wide. She held Flower and Berry, one in each arm, as if making sure the dolls could see too. "This is it," Spencer confirmed, unable to hide his smile at the girl's excitement. The last few weeks had been filled with arrangements. After his talk with Lois, when she'd told him her story and he'd decided not to leave, Spencer had started looking for a decent place for them to live. He didn't want to uproot them from their community entirely, but he wanted to give them security, comfort, a space where June could grow up without fear and Lois could finally rest her tired feet. Spencer got out and opened the car door for June, who hopped out like a whirlwind of energy. Lois was slower, moving cautiously because of her knee, which, thanks to Spencer's insistence, was now being treated by a good doctor. "Can I go inside? Can I see it?" June asked, practically bouncing up and down. Spencer nodded, handing her the key. "It's all yours." June ran to the door, fumbling with the lock for a few seconds before finally opening it. As soon as it swung open, she disappeared inside, her voice echoing with cries of wonder they could hear from outside. "Spencer," Lois began, searching for the right words. "Let's go in first," he suggested gently, offering his arm to help her. The inside of the house was simple but carefully arranged. Spencer had thought through every detail. The living room had wide windows that let in plenty of natural light. The furniture was new but comfortable and practical. The kitchen had modern, though not extravagant, appliances. There were shelves for books, a study corner for June, and even a cozy armchair Spencer imagined Lois could use to read or just rest. "Grandma! Grandma!" June's voice came from somewhere in the house. "There's a bedroom with a bed like a princess, and there's a space for me to draw, and a window from where you can see the whole sky." Lois stopped in the middle of the living room, looking around. Her eyes, usually so guarded, were misty. She raised a hand to her mouth, as if trying to stifle her emotions, but a tear slipped free and rolled silently down her cheek. "Spencer," she tried again, her voice trembling. "Come see, Grandma. Come look." June reappeared, grabbing her grandmother's hand and leading her excitedly to see the rest of the house. Spencer stayed behind, giving them space to explore. He heard June's exclamations and Lois's quiet awe, their steps moving from room to room. There was a profound satisfaction in those sounds, one no business success had ever given him. When they returned to the living room, June was still talking a mile a minute about everything she'd found. Lois, on the other hand, seemed to be processing the reality of it all. "Grandma's crying," June announced suddenly, noticing Lois's tears. Sometimes people cry when they're happy, sweetheart, Spencer explained, kneeling to her level. Like when I got Barry? June asked, grasping the concept. Exactly like that. June nodded, satisfied with the explanation, and went back to exploring every detail of the living room, leaving the adults a moment of quiet. Lois finally turned to Spencer, discreetly wiping her tears with the edge of her ever-present handkerchief. Spencer, she started for the third time, and now the words came out. I don't deserve all this. The simple statement carried so much gratitude, disbelief, a hint of guilt, and maybe fear. Fear that this was a dream, fear of accepting something so good after a lifetime of hardship. Spencer took a step forward, taking Lois's hands in his, hands that once dried his childhood tears, sewed his broken toys, prepared his meals. Hands that had worked tirelessly for decades. You're not being given anything, he said softly but firmly. You're receiving back what you've always given. Something in Lois's face softened, as if an invisible weight had been partially lifted. I always told June that life has a strange way of balancing things, she murmured, mostly to herself. I just never thought I'd see it happen. She moved a bit farther into the living room, gently touching the sofa, the table, the curtains. When she reached the wall, she laid her palm flat against it, as though asking life's permission to dream again. June bounded back from the kitchen, holding an apple she'd found in the fruit bowl. Can we really live here? She asked, taking a bite. Yes, sweetie, Lois said, her voice gaining some steadiness, if that's what you want. Are you going to live here with us, Uncle Spencer? The question came out of nowhere, with June's trademark directness. Spencer hesitated. He'd bought this house for them, planned to visit often, but actually living here, that possibility hadn't really crossed his mind. I have my apartment, June, he answered gently, but I'll come visit a lot. Something in the girl's face changed, an almost imperceptible shadow of disappointment replaced by acceptance. It was an expression Spencer recognized, the look of someone who had learned too early not to expect too much from life. 2 weeks later, the move was complete. There wasn't much to transport from the alley, some clothes, a few books, June's drawings, and of course Flower and Berry. Spencer hired movers, but he insisted on being there the entire time. As the last boxes were arranged, Spencer watched June settling into her new room. She insisted on placing Flower's cardboard chair beside the new table where Berry now sat. The two dolls, side by side, the old and the new, symbolized something Spencer was still learning. The ability to honor the past while embracing the future. Lois was in the kitchen, putting away the few utensils they'd brought along with the new ones Spencer had purchased. There was a rhythm to her movements, a familiar dance of domestic organization she'd performed in so many houses over the years, but this time it was her own. Spencer watched her for a moment before joining her. Something in her face had changed. The hard lines of worry seemed softer. Her eyes rekindled with renewed light. Need any help? He offered. Lois smiled, shaking her head. I've done this so many times I could organize a kitchen blindfolded, she said, but this one is special. I want to do it my way. He nodded in understanding. This wasn't just another house she was cleaning. It was her home, her sanctuary. June appeared in the kitchen doorway, watching them both. I've finished organizing my room, she announced, but there was something else in her expression. Does it look nice? Spencer asked. June nodded, but her eyes were serious, almost worried. What's wrong, sweetheart? Lois encouraged gently. June took a deep breath as if gathering courage. Now that we have everything, she began, her voice small. Are you going to leave? The question struck Spencer like lightning. There was no accusation in it, just genuine uncertainty and the fear of yet another loss. He could see in that moment the pattern June had learned in her short life. People with everything never stayed with those like her. They gave something, felt good about themselves, and then left. Spencer knelt to meet her gaze. He glanced at Lois, seeing the same unspoken question in her eyes. Then he turned back to June. Now that we have everything, he repeated her words, I want to stay. June's face lit up like the sun breaking through clouds. She threw herself into Spencer's arms with the abandon only a child can muster. Lois watched, leaning on the kitchen counter for support, tears filling her eyes. "I always knew you were a good boy," she said softly. Spencer hugged June, extending one arm to Lois. There, in the kitchen, lit by the late afternoon sun, the three of them stayed together in a moment that felt timeless. No words were needed. Each of them, in their own way, understood what was happening. This wasn't just a new house, an act of charity, or a debt repaid. A new family was being formed. Imperfect, unexpected, but real. Later, after June finally fell asleep in her new bed, exhausted from the day's excitement, Spencer and Lois sat on the porch, watching the first stars come out. "You know you don't really have to live here," Lois said gently. "June will understand." Spencer looked at the quiet street, so different from the alley, but also so different from the upscale neighborhood where his empty apartment waited. "I think I'll keep my apartment for now," he replied. "But I want to spend a lot of time here if you'll let me." "This is your home too now," Lois said simply. They fell silent for a while, soaking in the night's calm, the distant murmur of the city, the sense of new possibilities unfolding. "Thank you," Lois whispered at last. Spencer shook his head. "No, thank you for showing me what really matters." Inside June's room, she slept peacefully, flower and berry side by side on her new shelf, silent witnesses to a fresh start. Around them, the house was quiet, not with the tense silence of the alley, but with the peace of a place they could finally call home. The days in the new house settled into a routine none of them had planned, but that felt right. Spencer spent his mornings in meetings and conferences, but saved his afternoons and evenings for Lois and June. Gradually, the guest room began to fill with his belongings, a few suits in the closet, books on the nightstand, his laptop on the desk. Lois never mentioned this silent transition, but her expressions spoke volumes. When Spencer arrived each evening, her face lit up momentarily, as if someone had switched on an inner light. June was less restrained. She ran to the door, bombarding him with questions about his day, showing him the drawings she'd made at school. One particularly cold fall afternoon, Spencer arrived earlier than usual. June wasn't back from school yet, and Lois was in the kitchen brewing tea. "Something happened?" she asked, noticing Spencer's thoughtful expression. He nodded, sitting down at the kitchen table. There was a difference in him, an undercurrent of energy, a new determination. "I need to talk to you about something important," he said, taking the mug of tea Lois offered. She sat down across from him, wearing the attentive look Spencer remembered from childhood, someone who truly knows how to listen. "I resigned from my position as CEO of Harrington Innovations today," he announced, surprised at how easily the words came. Lois's eyes widened, but she said nothing, waiting for him to go on. "I'm not leaving the company. I'll remain as chairman of the board, but I don't want to be involved in daily operations anymore. I have new plans now." "New plans," Lois repeated calmly, though her eyes were sharp. Spencer took a deep breath. It was the first time he'd spoken out loud about the idea that had been forming in his mind for weeks. "I want to start a foundation," he explained, "dedicated to families like yours and June's. Families headed by grandparents, by single moms, by people who never expected to raise children but do so with dignity and love." Lois carefully placed her mug back on the table. Her eyes studied Spencer as though seeing him in a new light. "You don't have to do this for us," she said softly. "You've already done more than enough." Spencer shook his head. "I'm not doing it for you, or at least not only for you. I'm doing it because I realized something important. There are thousands of people like you and June out there, silently struggling, invisible to people like I used to be." He stirred his tea thoughtfully. "I've spent my whole life chasing goals my father set for me. I built a fortune, but never stopped to think about what I really wanted to do with it. Until now." "What will this foundation look like?" Lois asked, and Spencer could tell she was genuinely interested, not just being polite. "I'm thinking of calling it the Living Roots Foundation," he said, a small smile on his lips. "Because that's what you taught me, that strong roots can grow even in the most unlikely soil." He went on to explain his vision, an organization offering more than just financial aid. There would be legal support for grandparents seeking custody of grandchildren, medical assistance for elderly caregivers who neglected their own health, educational programs for children, career guidance for single mothers, dignified housing for vulnerable families. "And I want you to be part of it, Lois," he said, finally reaching the heart of his pitch. "Not as a beneficiary, but as a mentor." Lois frowned, confused. "A mentor? Me?" "No one understands these families better than you," Spencer explained. "You've lived what they live. You know what they need, not just materially, but emotionally. You can listen, guide, welcome. Your experience is worth more than any theory or statistic." Lois fell silent, absorbing his proposal. Spencer could see the conflict in her eyes, surprise, insecurity, but also a spark of hope. "I'm not sure I'm qualified," she said finally. "I don't have formal education, never worked in places like that." "That's exactly why I need you," Spencer interrupted kindly. "Places like that often have people with degrees and theories, but lack someone who truly understands the inside of these problems." At that moment, the front door opened, and June burst in, bringing with her the cold fall wind and the endless energy she seemed to possess. "Uncle Spencer, you're early," she exclaimed, dropping her backpack in a corner and rushing to hug him. "Just in time," Spencer said, returning her hug. "We were talking about something that involves you too." "Me?" June's eyes shone with curiosity. Spencer explained the foundation in simple terms she could grasp. As he spoke, June's face brightened more and more. "And you, June," he concluded, "could help with drawings to make the place prettier. Greet people who come, talk to the other kids." "Can I be an official assistant?" she asked, excited. "The most official assistant ever," Spencer confirmed, smiling. "Are you really serious about this, Spencer?" Lois asked, still processing everything. "You really want to do it?" "I've never been more sure of anything," he replied firmly. "I already hired a legal team to handle the paperwork. I found an old building that can be renovated for the headquarters. The initial funds are set aside." "Why?" Lois's question was simple but full of meaning. Spencer looked at June, who was now drawing an enthusiastic vision of the new foundation, then back at Lois. "Because for the first time, I know what I really want my legacy to be," he answered. "I don't want to be remembered just for building a profitable company or amassing wealth. I don't want to be a hero who shows up, fixes a problem and leaves." He paused, speaking straight from the heart. "I don't want to be a hero. I just want to be someone who stays." Lois reached across the table, gently touching Spencer's hand. A simple gesture, but one they both understood deeply. "That was always your true potential," she said softly, "even as a child. Your father only saw success in terms of money and power, but you always had something else inside you, the ability to really see people, to care." Suddenly, June stood up, drawing finished. "Look, I already drew the foundation," she announced, showing off a brightly colored building with figures of all shapes and sizes, holding hands around it. At the top, in big uneven letters, she had written, "Living Roots Foundation." Spencer and Lois exchanged a meaningful glance. The decision was made, not through formal documents or grand statements, but right there in that cozy kitchen, with a pot of tea on the table and a child's drawing that had changed their lives. In the following weeks, the Living Roots Foundation began to take shape. Spencer worked tirelessly on the practical details, the legal structure, renovating the building, hiring staff. Lois, initially hesitant, surprised herself by taking a more active role in discussions about how the foundation should function. "People need a place where they don't feel judged," she insisted during a meeting with the team Spencer had assembled, "where they can show their vulnerabilities without fear of losing custody of their grandchildren or being deemed unfit." The professionals, social workers, psychologists, lawyers listened attentively. Many of them, Spencer realized, had never truly listened to someone who had lived these experiences firsthand. Meanwhile, June insisted on being part of everything. Her drawings started appearing in the foundation's preliminary materials. She accompanied Spencer and Lois on visits to the under-renovation building, offering suggestions for wall colors and children's spaces. "In my world, everything has color," she explained to the smiling architects. "A sad place has to become a colorful place." One afternoon, as they watched workers install larger windows in what would be the main welcome room, Lois turned to Spencer. "You really have changed," she observed. Spencer looked at June, who was talking animatedly with a painter about which shade of yellow would be best for the kids' area. "No," he replied thoughtfully. "I think I finally found myself." The late afternoon sun shone through the windows of the new house, creating squares of golden light on the wooden floor. Lois had gone to a meeting at the Living Roots Foundation, now in the final stages of renovation. Spencer quietly worked on his laptop, replying to emails and organizing documents for the upcoming grand opening. June sat on the rug, surrounded by a semicircle of her things: the sewing kit Spencer had bought months ago, some colorful scraps of fabric, and her 2 dolls. Berry, with her cotton dress, sat as an observer. Flower, the one-armed doll, lay carefully on a piece of fabric June had spread out like a tiny bed. Spencer watched her discreetly over the laptop screen. June's forehead was scrunched in concentration, the tip of her tongue peeking out the corner of her mouth as she tried to thread the needle, a task requiring all her developing coordination. "Need help?" Spencer offered, after seeing her fail 3 times. "No," June said determinedly. "Grandma said I have to do it by myself to learn." Spencer smiled, returning to his work. That was June, stubbornly independent when she set her mind to something. Lois had been teaching her basic sewing lessons in the past weeks, and the girl was absorbing everyone with impressive seriousness. "Got it," she exclaimed at last, lifting the needle triumphantly with the thread in place. "Congratulations," Spencer said, genuinely impressed. June approached Flower with reverence. She aligned the loose arm carefully with the doll's shoulder. The thread she'd chosen was red, unlike the original beige, so the stitching would be visible. "We don't have the same color of thread," June explained, seeing Spencer's curious look. "But this way it's prettier. We'll see where she was hurt and where she got stronger again." Spencer closed his laptop, completely captivated by the small ritual unfolding before him. June began sewing with uneven but firm stitches. Now and then she paused to check if the arm was staying in place. Once she pricked her finger and let out a tiny ouch, but she never considered giving up. "Grandma said every stitch has to be done thinking good thoughts," June commented while she worked. "So the seam holds strong." "What are you thinking about?" Spencer asked. June didn't answer right away, focusing on a particularly tricky stitch. "Us," she finally said. "You, Grandma, our new house, the kids who come to the foundation, good things." Spencer felt a lump in his throat. This child, with her simple yet profound wisdom, had a way of reaching corners of his heart he hadn't known existed. June continued working for nearly an hour. Spencer completely abandoned his tasks, preferring to watch her dedication. Sometimes she'd pause to tell Flower a story, assuring the doll it wouldn't hurt, that she'd be better soon, that Berry was there to keep her company. When she finished the last stitch, June tied a firm knot and snipped the thread with a round-tipped pair of scissors. She lifted the doll carefully, testing the result. The arm was reattached, though the red stitching made a kind of visible scar around the doll's shoulder. "All done," June said with satisfaction. She lifted Flower to eye level, as though speaking to her. "Now you can hug Berry properly," Spencer smiled, touched by the scene. "It looks great, June," he praised sincerely. "You're good at this." June critically examined her work. "It's a bit crooked," she admitted, "but Grandma said first stitches always are. The important thing is she won't lose her arm anymore." She made Flower give Berry a test hug, testing the newly repaired arm's strength. "She's stronger now because of the patch," June declared with the absolute certainty of a child. Spencer scooted closer, sitting on the rug beside her. "How so?" he asked, genuinely curious about her logic. "Before, the arm was hanging and could fall off," June explained, demonstrating with the dolls. "Now, even though it has a red stitch, the arm is tighter than before. She got stronger where she broke." Spencer nodded slowly, understanding the depth of her words. "Like us," June added, looking at Spencer with those eyes that saw more than met the eye. "Grandma says we also got stronger where we broke." Spencer felt something shift inside him, a deeper understanding beyond words. He thought of Lois, her silent suffering, her quiet strength. Of June, who lost her mother so young but still found magic in the world. Of himself, carrying empty spaces that were just now beginning to fill. Grandma also said nothing has to be brand new, June continued, putting her sewing kit away neatly. It just has to be cared for. Those simple words echoed deep within him. Spencer looked at the two dolls side by side. Berry in her newness, Flower with her red-stitched arm, her worn fabric, her visible memories. Nothing has to be brand new. It just has to be cared for. It was such a simple yet profound truth that Spencer felt as though June had just handed him a key to something essential he'd spent his whole life searching for. The old factory was unrecognizable. Where there were once grey walls and broken windows, now stood vibrant colors and large open spaces flooded with natural light. In the center of the courtyard, a garden grew, not decorative but truly functional, full of herbs, vegetables, and flowers. Wooden benches were arranged in circles, creating gathering spots. A colorful playground took up one corner, where children could play while adults joined activities. At the entrance, a plain but elegant sign read, "Living Roots Foundation, a home for caregivers." It was opening day. Spencer was nervous, though he tried not to show it. He wore a simple suit without a tie, formality for the event, but not the corporate stiffness he'd left behind. Next to him, Lois wore a light blue dress that June had persuaded her to buy for the occasion. Her grey hair was pinned in a simple bun, and she held June's hand firmly. June Jai, dressed in bright yellow overalls, clutched Flower and Berry in a small backpack. She could barely contain her excitement. Her eyes constantly scanned the venue, making sure every detail was the way she'd suggested. Colorful curtains in the kids' room, murals she'd helped paint, big cushions in the reading room. "Nervous?" Lois asked, noticing how Spencer kept adjusting his watch. "A little," he admitted. "It's different from launching a product or opening a new branch. This really matters." Lois nodded, understanding. This wasn't just another venture. It was the tangible outcome of Spencer's inner transformation, a bridge between who he had been and who he was becoming. The first guests started to arrive. An interesting mix: city officials, other social organizations, but mostly families. Grandparents of all ages with their grandchildren, single mums with young children, unconventional families who rarely found spaces they felt truly welcomed. Spencer had insisted on making the opening less formal. No long speeches, no ribbon cutting. Instead, the foundation simply opened its doors, inviting people to explore the space, learn about the services, and feel how it could become part of their lives. "Can I show them around?" June asked an older woman, arriving with two little ones, obviously her grandchildren. The grandmother, initially surprised to be greeted by a child, soon smiled at June's enthusiasm. "Sure, sweetheart. This way. First, I'll show you the kids' area, which is the coolest place," June announced, gently taking the hands of the two shy children. Lois watched, touched by how her granddaughter naturally assumed the role of hostess, guiding not just the children, but also their grandparents around the foundation, as if it were a magical castle. Meanwhile, Spencer moved among the visitors, explaining the foundation's purpose. It wasn't a rehearsed pitch or a corporate presentation, just a genuine conversation fueled by personal conviction and the transformative experience he'd had. "Our idea is simple," he told a group of grandparents. "We want this to be a place where you find practical help, but also understanding. A place where the difficulties you face aren't treated as personal failures, but as challenges we can handle together." An older lady, holding the hand of a boy of about 8, timidly raised her hand. "How much does it cost to be part of the programs?" "Nothing," Spencer answered firmly. "Absolutely nothing. Everything is free for families." The disbelief on many faces spoke volumes about their past experiences: broken promises, conditional help, doors closing right when they were needed most. Lois was the one who truly broke that barrier of mistrust. In a corner of the main hall, she started a simple conversation with two grandmothers. Soon, others joined. The wisdom in her voice, the life in her face, and the genuine understanding in her eyes, all said without words, "I know, I understand, I've been there too." Spencer watched from a distance, feeling proud as he saw Lois naturally become the foundation's beating heart. It wasn't the offered services, legal support, medical assistance, educational programs that truly attracted people. It was the unspoken promise of being genuinely seen, their struggles recognized, their stories heard. Over the afternoon, what began as a formal event turned into something more like a family gathering. Kids who arrived shy were now darting around the playground, watched by adults beginning to relax and share stories, trade advice. In the garden, a group of grandmothers exchanged medicinal recipes with the herbalist Spencer had hired to manage the space. In another room, young moms sat in a circle with a family law attorney. In the library, older kids helped younger ones pick books, spontaneously creating a reading share system nobody had planned, but that worked perfectly. "You've built something extraordinary here," commented a social worker from another organization. Spencer shook his head. "I didn't build it alone," he replied, glancing at Lois, who was guiding a grandmother through school-related issues, and at June, proudly showing her drawings to other kids. Late in the afternoon, as the sun began to set, casting a golden glow through the foundation's large windows, Spencer found June sitting alone on one of the benches in the garden. She held Flower and Berry in her lap, watching the people around her with a contemplative look surprisingly mature for her age. "What did you think of our big day?" Spencer asked, sitting beside her. June smiled, hugging her dolls. "It's the best place in the whole world," she declared with the absolute certainty only children have. "All the grandmas look like Grandma Lois now. Less sad, less tired." Spencer nodded, once again impressed by her keen observations. "Do you know why this place is important?" she asked abruptly, looking straight at him. "Tell me, June." She adjusted the dolls side by side, making sure both were comfortable before responding. "Because you saw me, Mr. Spencer," she said simply. "Everyone needs to be seen." Spencer felt the force of those words. It was true. All his transformation, everything about this project, began the moment on the street when, for the first time in years, he truly saw another person, not as a problem to be solved or a statistic, but as a complete human being with dignity and value. "You're very wise for your age, you know," he said, slipping an arm around her small shoulders. She shrugged with that unique blend of innocence and ancient wisdom that so often surprised him. "Grandma says wisdom comes from paying attention to important things." Across the garden, Lois watched them. Her eyes glowed with a look Spencer now recognized, not just pride, but a deeper sense of purpose fulfilled, of circles closing, of roots that, despite storms, found strength to bloom again. The Living Roots Foundation was no longer just a renovated building or a set of services. It was the realization of a truth Spencer had discovered through June and Lois. Real transformation starts when we truly see each other, recognize our shared humanity, and understand that none of us is truly alone in our struggles. As the sun set on the first official day of this new chapter, Spencer knew with calm certainty that he had finally found the purpose he'd searched for his entire life. Not in bank account figures or impressive titles, but in the profound simplicity of being truly present in other people's lives. Sunday sunlight streamed through the kitchen windows, creating golden pools of light on the wooden floor. Soft music played on an old radio Lois had insisted on bringing from the old house. "Some older things have soul," she'd say, and no one dared disagree. Spencer stood at the counter, slicing apples into thin pieces for a pie. His fingers, once used only to sign documents and type on keyboards, had acquired new skills these past months. They now moved confidently on the cutting board, guiding the knife with precision as he turned apples into uniform slices. June, perched on a small stool, was mixing cake batter in a large bowl. Her tongue poked out at the corner of her mouth, an infallible sign of concentration. Beside her, Flower and Berry supervised, positioned carefully so they wouldn't get dirty, yet close enough to be part of the activity. "Is it looking good?" Spencer asked, leaning over to peek into the bowl. "Almost," June replied, stirring with determination. "Grandma said there can't be any lumps of flour." Lois, sitting at the table peeling oranges for juice, hummed softly along with the music. Her hands, still marked by years of hard work, moved with grace. The treatment for her knee had significantly improved her mobility, though rainy days still brought some pain. "I washed the baking pan, Grandma," June announced, showing the bowl of yellow batter, now smooth and creamy. Lois smiled, a smile that lit her entire face. "Perfect, my love. Bring it here so I can check." June carefully climbed down from the stool and handed the bowl to her grandmother. Lois examined the mixture seriously, as if evaluating a work of art. "It passes quality control," she finally declared, making June beam with pride. "Now we can pour it into the pan." Spencer finished slicing apples and joined them, helping to pour the batter into the round baking tin. It was a choreography they'd naturally developed, each with a role, moving seamlessly around the kitchen, helping each other without needing to ask. "Why are we making so much food?" June asked, licking some leftover batter off her finger. "Because today is a special day," Lois replied, wiping her hands on her apron. "It's exactly 1 year since we met Spencer." June's eyes went wide in surprise. A whole year? She seemed unable to believe so much time had passed. For a child, a year feels like an eternity. Spencer felt a tightness in his chest. 1 year. Only a year since that night when a small girl with a broken doll stopped him on the street, uttering the words that changed his life. It felt both so long, and yet like it was yesterday. "That's why I chose carrot cake," Lois said, placing the pan in the preheated oven. "It was Spencer's favorite when he was little." Spencer smiled, touched that she remembered such a detail after so many years. "How did you know?" June asked, ever curious. "Because I looked after him when he was little," Lois replied. "I remember he always asked for 2 slices, even if I said no. And you always ended up giving them to me," Spencer added, the memory clear as day. They laughed, sharing a moment from a long-lost past. June seemed fascinated by the idea that Spencer had been a child just like her. "So you were already a family before?" June asked, trying to piece the story together. Spencer and Lois exchanged looks. So much was contained in that simple question. "In a way," Lois answered carefully, "but we lost contact for a long time. But now we found each other again," June concluded, with a child's logic. "And now it's forever, right?" Spencer felt warmth spread through his chest. How to answer without making promises life could break. Yet looking at June and Lois, at this sunlit kitchen, at the life they had built together, he knew there was only one true answer. "Yes," he said simply. "Now it's forever." June nodded, satisfied, as if merely confirming something she already sensed. "You're already part of the family, Spencer," she stated with the absolute confidence only a child can have. Lois smiled, her eyes shining with both emotion and wisdom. "Blood ties are strong," she said softly, resting her hand on Spencer's over the table, "but bonds of care last forever." The rest of the afternoon followed the sweet routine they'd created in the past months. They ate together on the porch, sharing simple stories and making future plans. June showed them new drawings she'd done for the foundation. Lois talked about the group of grandmothers organizing a community care system for those who needed to work. Spencer shared ideas for expanding the foundation's services to neighboring areas. Then they all headed to the Living Roots Foundation together, as they did most Sundays, even when it was closed. June liked watering the garden plants. Lois made sure everything was ready for the coming week, and Spencer often used the time to catch up on administrative tasks. It was when they arrived at the main gate that they noticed something new. June ran ahead, stopping in front of the freshly painted sign installed during the week. In bright letters, clearly designed by the foundation's art team based on one of her drawings, were the words, "Family is who stays." Spencer felt a lump in his throat. He remembered when June had said something like that, months ago, and how those words resonated inside him. Now made permanent on that sign, they seemed to summarize everything they'd built together. "Do you like it?" June asked, watching his reaction carefully. "I asked the art group to make it exactly like my drawing." "It's perfect," he replied, voice slightly choked with emotion. On the way home, as the sun set and the sky turned shades of orange and pink, Spencer watched June walking ahead, holding Lois's hand. The girl hopped and skipped, chattering about her plans for the week, about helping to paint the new room at the foundation, about a friend at school who might visit. Lois occasionally looked back, meeting Spencer's eyes with a smile that conveyed more than words: gratitude, kinship, belonging. Spencer took a deep breath, embracing the moment. If someone had told him a year ago that his life would change so drastically, that he'd find purpose and joy not in financial acquisitions or corporate power, but in the simplicity of Sundays like this, he wouldn't have believed them. He smiled, accepting a truth now so obvious. In this story, he wasn't the hero who rescued an elderly woman and a child from poverty. He wasn't the benefactor who transformed lives with his money. The reality was far more profound, far more beautiful. He hadn't saved anyone. He was the one saved. Saved from a loneliness he hadn't realized he felt. Saved from the emptiness he filled with work and achievements. Saved from a life of material abundance and emotional scarcity. As they walked together beneath the painted sunset sky, the billionaire, the grandmother, and the little girl, the roles the world assigned them simply vanished. They weren't savior and saved, benefactor and beneficiaries, rich and poor. They were simply a family. And that, Spencer finally understood, was all that truly mattered. If this story touched your heart, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next ones. Leave a like because it helps this story get recommended to more people. See you in the next story.